Blessings to you in the name of Jesus Christ, and welcome to Pastors for Pastors, the podcast that supports and celebrates pastors of all churches and denominations. I'm Ken Broman-Fulks, your host, and I got a couple of questions for you. How much of your humanness do you reveal to your faith community as well as the community in which you live? Do you hide your failures and imperfections? Do you present yourself and your family as somehow above average when it comes to the personal side of life? And just how human should we be as we fulfill the role of pastor? Well, I'm so glad you've joined me for this episode because my guest today is the Reverend Andrew Taylor-Troutman, a pastor and writer who recently published an article in the Presbyterian Outlook entitled, Our Very Humanness. That caught my attention, and after reading the article, I reached out to Andrew. Full disclosure, we've known each other for some 15 years, and asked him to join me for a chat about this very topic, our very humanness. So without further ado, let's join the conversation. Since I started this podcast, I've been wanting to have you on, and when I read the article we're going to talk about in a second, that was like the switch that went, okay, this is it. This is the time. So thanks for doing this.
Absolutely.
Tell us a little bit about you and where you come from and where you went to school and your family and all those kinds of things.
Well, like your last guest, Jill Duffield, I was born in Canada.
Is that right?
That's right, in Edmonton, just outside of Edmonton. My father is a Moravian pastor, and he was recently married and took a field ed placement there. And surprise, surprise, I came along. But I grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina, where Dad has been pastor of Raleigh Moravian for 35 years now. And so I grew up in North Carolina, went to undergrad at Lenore Ryan, seminary at what was Union PSCE, Union Presbyterian Seminary. But then I took my first call to New Dublin Presbyterian Church, which is in the mountains of southwestern Virginia, a congregation founded in 1769. And I served there for almost 8 years. And then in January of 2018, came to chapel in the Pines here in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. My wife, who's also an ordained Presbyterian pastor, has been with me the whole time. And we now have 3 children who later this fall will be 8, 5, and 3 years old.
You've had several books published.
I've written 4 books. Take My Hand, which is a collection of sermons, Parables of Parenthood, a novella called Earning Innocence. And I just published a book called Gently Between the Words. And it's a collection of first-person essays and poems.
I read, I guess, an article or a blog, a column that you had published recently in the Presbyterian Outlook. I would love it if you would read that column.
So this is called Our Very Humanness. A few weeks ago, our church started celebrating the sacrament of communion over Zoom. I set up the meeting, then led the prayer of great thanksgiving. Participants ate and drank their own elements in their homes. I'm not writing to defend or debate the theology of partaking the Lord's Supper over a video conference call. I'm writing because last week I forgot all about the call. Even though I'd written the communion prayer earlier that very day, the appointment completely slipped my mind. I left my phone upstairs and realized my mistake well after the scheduled time, and only after I received a half dozen text messages wondering what was wrong. I was quick to text apologies to these people, but my wife, also a pastor, encouraged me to come clean in an email to the congregation. She has read a lot of Brené Brown's theory of courageous vulnerability. Still, I hesitated. I hate to make mistakes. This one was particularly embarrassing. I eventually agreed. It was crucial to share the truth. I told the congregation the reason I forgot was that ever since my children have started virtual school, every day is overwhelming. In confessing this burden, I didn't want people to worry. I assured them that my family would find our rhythm and that I was committed to weekly Wednesday communion because I knew it was life-giving for many of our members. But they needed to know the truth about their pastor's life, his very human life. When I was a younger pastor, I asked an older minister colleague what he was most looking forward to about retirement. He immediately responded, "Being a human again." He quickly tried to laugh it off, but I knew he wasn't joking. I could read the weariness written all over his face. I would love to serve in my current call for a long time. I would love to raise my family here with the church's support, but I won't last long pretending that I'm not human. The word human shares the same root as humility. I need to be honest with the church and myself about my limitations, my shortcomings, and my cringeworthy mistakes. For I want my parishioners to share their vulnerabilities with me, including the times when they feel overwhelmed, burned out from exhaustion. Brené Brown's research proves that vulnerability can build trust. Sometimes having a human moment can bring out the humanity in others. Between the pandemic, the economy, and the upcoming election, this is an overwhelming time for many people. I think the most helpful theological position is not whether it's efficacious to break bread together over a video conference, but that we are all broken and in need of grace. We are all human together.
There are so many things in there that touched me reading that and hearing you talk about it is generational differences. As I
Yes.
mentioned to you when I sent you a note about this, when I was in seminary I started seminary 43 years ago. Um, the idea of vulnerability or transparency in ministers was looked down on, frowned upon. I remember my preaching professor saying, "Do not talk about yourself in your sermons. It's not about you." And the idea of professionalism, uh, and I learned as time went on that I didn't agree with that, and I didn't believe in that. There is value in sharing who I am and to some extent who my family is, as long as it's okay with them.
Well, we had a deal growing up. If Dad, he would have to tell us if he was going to mention us in the sermon on Saturday night, and we had veto power.
There you go.
He gave that to us.
So you know. But it also struck a chord in me because the last two places that I have lived, I have had neighbors who called me preacher, even even though they were not members of my church, they were not Presbyterian. They just knew that I was a pastor. Talk to me about how you've experienced being seen as a clergy person and how you've experienced getting past that with vulnerability. Or
Sure. Well, let me first say that, I'm not one that that thinks the newer is necessarily better. But one of the things that I'm aware of is what you were taught about professionalism in seminary. In the course of Christian history, that interpretation is very new. The idea of a parish pastor kind of upheld, literally Dr. So-and-so walking into the big pulpit. I think of in this own country, in the beginning, particularly the Methodists, who were so keyed in on lay leaders, and they would give their testimonies. And that was a crucial thing. I think of the hush harbors where slaves gathered in order to speak of their own experience and how comforting that was. And I also think of some of our great hymns that express the vulnerability. Rock of Ages, let me hide myself in thee. Abide with me, O help of the helpless. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a professional like me. That's not it. So I just want to push back on that model. But the way that I do that is through a lot of Brene Brown's work, and what she's discovered is that it's that presenting yourself in a certain way as without mistakes actually creates unhelpful barriers to team building, and that when a leader does that, it actually creates anxiety within the team. And I think this is perhaps especially true in religious context, where if the pastor is going to present him or herself as above the congregation, it's going to be problematic to have deep and meaningful relationships. And so, what I really see it as is it's a return to kind of this idea of testimony as part of the vulnerability, because the real hope is, as Paul says, we hold this treasure in clay jars, right? I mean, the grace shines through, not in spite of our human weakness, but precisely because of it.
Really powerfully true. One of the things that you just said, Brene Brown's work, was the anxiety that it produces when the leader comes across as being without fault or more authoritative. What causes that anxiety? Do you know what her research has found?
Sure. It's the idea that, well, then if I'm going to be a part of that team, I need to measure up too. I need to be just as perfect. That's what we're expecting. It's very, very Calvinist to say that we're not perfect. and that the awareness of that is not meant to shame. But that's the paradox, right? That's the irony of trying to present yourself as this perfect Christian. You actually can end up shaming people because they think they can't live up to it. And that's, in the best sense. I mean, there's also a dynamic in our culture where we put people on a pedestal to knock them down, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I really think that's a danger in it too. And
I'm also struck by the idea that the number of people who have been on those kinds of pedestals in a very public way, whose falls have been even more dramatic because they came across as being blameless in many ways.
Yeah, and that grieves me, and it is very damaging to our corporate witness.
Right.
I mean, there's let's say another side to it though too. I mean, I heard Nadia Bolz-Weber say one time that you don't preach about your wounds, You preach about your scars.
Mhm.
And so this is something that you've worked out. You're not presenting your vulnerabilities for your congregation to fix them. That is also very damaging.
Right.
And so I want to be quick to add that. And that's even in that little piece. Like I assured them of some certain things, right? Our family's going to find our rhythm. This is important to me. This is not something that I need to drop.
Yeah.
So it becomes a scar, and the scars you can tell a story about.
Yeah.
The wounds you need to heal,
and then it becomes, it's not so much about you.
That's right. It becomes about that. That's how we create trust, and that's how we build empathy. Okay. I can imagine myself in your shoes, Ken. What can I apply that to my own life?
And you're right, that whole professionalism thing is pretty recent, but there's also something to be said for that.
Sure.
And
go right ahead.
Yeah, no, I just want to put that out there for you to talk about too, because on the other side of that coin is the recognition. To me, professionalism is the recognition that there is a difference between being the pastor and being a member of the congregation, and that has to do with an inequality of power, and to respect those boundaries, and to recognize that I do play a role in people's lives, and part of that role is that I have more power than they do in certain aspects of our relationship, and I need to be very aware of and careful about that.
Absolutely. One of the ways power is abused is when it is not fully recognized.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I just hone in on what you said is the word role. My father, he told me from the beginning, he said, you have to understand that as a pastor, you are always in that role.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not a role like I would take on for a movie where it's not the real world. But rather it has everything to do with power, as you say so well, Ken. And a lot of that role is the power that people give to you, that they're looking to you, to help them, to teach them, to guide them, to comfort them, in some sense to be the church for you, for them.
Right.
And that is a powerful thing. It's a humbling thing. This is Pastors4Pastors, right?
Right.
I mean, that's the heart of it. That's what we need to talk about. And there are times when among pastors, it's really helpful to let that role go, right? But you can't do that. Certainly not in your church, but really not in the larger public. My joke about that, my wife used to always, so my first call, there's a small rural community, and we would just be in the grocery store, and everyone that would walk by would just smile and wave. And she would be like, who is that? And I said, well, I don't know, but they know who I am. So is that role. And
Exactly.
If you don't have healthy ways of dealing with that, you will get burned out.
I have found this to be true in for myself, but also the things I've read have said that it's true of most ministers, is that our insecurities generally come around the topic of whether we are acceptable to other people, and the overwhelming majority of ministers who have had personality inventories have shown that we are people pleasers, And one of the things that you said in your article was that you hate making mistakes. Me too. Me too. I hate showing that vulnerability, that imperfection. Uh, but that because I want people to love me, I want people to like me. That comes out of my own insecurities. But that's, on a podcast for pastors, that's something we all need to be aware of.
I'd tell you a quick anecdote. Since COVID, I've started doing this Facebook Live Sunday morning devotional. It's just a quick little thing, little 10 minutes, and it's with my guitar. And, I make mistakes all the time. I don't. And it's precisely the mistakes that people love. And they'll even say, it's just like, it's so nice to see you just make a mistake and laugh or just keep going.
Yeah, it does that because it's out there. I love the fact that you said that because I watched one of your videos, the one where you started by singing Peace Train.
Oh, yeah.
And it was great. You did a great job. But right at the very beginning, there was a little mistake on the guitar.
Hey, good morning. Grace and peace to you. Let's get started.
And there was a twinkle in your eye as you looked at the camera like, there I go again.
That's very astute of you.
I've been happy lately, thinking about the good things to come. And I believe it could be something good has begun.
Yeah, that was absolutely what was happening there.
What other things did you learn from being a preacher's kid?
Oh, gosh, what a great question. I guess two things to say. One, I had a great experience. I mean, really an amazing church. And I was the first son of the young pastor who came in. So at a time in the church when it was, we'll say, rebuilding. And so there was a time for much of my childhood where I was in a spotlight. And that was really affirming to me. I mean, people were interested in the sports I played, and they would chuckle when I would put a baseball through the fellowship hall window. My father did not, but so it was wonderful. I mean, I really did get a sense of the church as a larger extended family. That's not to say that I wasn't also aware of the pressures that were on my father. And so I saw that side of it too.
Did you ever add to those pressures?
Absolutely.
let me explain why I asked that, because I have four sons, and they are all great guys, and they were great guys growing up, but they were just normal kids, and when they became teenagers, I was in South Carolina in a small town, a fairly large congregation, but in a small town where, as you put it, everybody, you're at a grocery store, everybody waves at you and says hello. Everybody knew who I was. And I just remember that our oldest son, I actually, I don't remember what he did, but I do remember him doing something that got him in enough trouble that more people found out about it. And I sat down with him, and I actually ended up doing this with all four of them. And I said, I want you to be who you are. And I want you to be as involved in the church as you want to be. And I don't expect you to do anything because you are the preacher's kid. But I also want you to understand that your actions have ramifications for my ministry. When you do things that bring negative attention, that actually hurts my ministry, because people think of me differently. And so what you do reflects on me as well. And I remember my oldest son, Josh, when I said that, it was like, wow, he didn't realize the power that he had. And I've always wondered if I should have said that to my boys, but it was true. And I felt like it was something they needed to understand, that being a preacher's kid does put you in a position that most other children and young people are not in. But and they need to be aware of that.
I will remember that. You telling me for my children. I mean, I think that is very wise of you, Ken. I mean, it first, as you said, it's true. But what you were really doing there is being vulnerable with your son. You were saying, "Look, this what you do impacts me. It could hurt me," and that takes that's that courageous vulnerability.
One Sunday morning between the early and the 11 o'clock service during Sunday school, I was in my office, and my wife and one of my sons comes in, and Suzette says, he has something that he needs to tell you. And he said, there's a warrant out for my arrest. And it turns out that he was 16. He was driving with some of his friends, and they had decided to steal some lawn ornaments, some of those concrete lawn ornaments. And he actually had to come home. It was a Saturday night, and he had a curfew, and he came home. The other boys continued to do that and got caught and got taken to the police station. And they told them that my son was also doing this. and so one of the boys called him on Sunday morning and said, they're looking for you. and he asked me, what should I do? I said, get your rear end down to the police station. What was really redeeming about that was that Sunday night was our monthly session meeting.
Mm.
And so at the end of the session meeting, I explained what had happened. And I said, I don't know, because our little town's newspaper publishes everything that, the police record, everybody who gets arrested for anything. And I said, you just need to know that my son's name may appear on the police blotter in the newspaper. And this is what happened. and it was a wonderful moment of that vulnerability, because after the session meeting was over, almost everybody stuck around to tell me how much they appreciated me sharing, how much they appreciated seeing that my family was just a normal family like their families. And the number of people who said, hey, if you knew what I had gotten arrested for when I was a teenager, that built so much trust and understanding and identification.
The temptation would have been to hold it, right?
Yeah. I think, honestly, if it hadn't been for the possibility of his name showing up in the newspaper, I might not have said anything.
Yeah.
And I would have been the poorer for it. I think our congregation, our elders would have been.
Yeah. One of the results of that sharing of vulnerability that I hear in that is just a kindness. And, I hold on to these lines from Naomi Shihab Nye. She has a poem called Kindness. And, she says, before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things.
Yeah. Another article that you wrote recently, you used the quote, and I don't remember who said it that you quoted, but gobsmacked by grace.
Oh, that's Brian Doyle. Yeah.
That's Brian Doyle. And yeah, you've got to lose something. You've got to fail somehow before you can experience that grace. Yeah. Do you have more books in the works? Or I know the column for Outlook is pretty regular, but it seems like you publish in other things too. What else do you have going on?
I've been writing around the topic of anti-racism for a magazine out of Asheville called The Porch, The Porch magazine. The tagline is "A slow conversation about beautiful and difficult things."
That's great.
And so I've been writing about my work with anti-racism, both in terms of my past and present, both as an individual and as a leader of a faith community.
Talk about that some, because racism, along with the pandemic, and now here we are 2 months away from an election that
Sure.
is getting plenty of attention. What are you doing with that, and how is this current time affecting your ministry and your congregation?
Well, we have launched an anti-racism initiative that our session adopted. That was really kind of general. We want to take a public stand, and so we're looking at ways that we can do that. One of the first things we did when George Floyd was killed, he was killed on May 25th. And I remember this because my wife's birthday is May 24th. And we were at the beach. And this being COVID time, I had recorded the service ahead of time. So the Sunday after his death, in our video, there was no mention of anything. Not George Floyd, nothing to do with racism or anything. And, I wrote to the congregation and I said, that is unacceptable. So every week we name the sin of racism in our prayer of confession. We also have started a prayer partnership with a local historically Black church very close to us. And this is a lot of fun. We recognize that, that we can't gather in person, the two churches. So we've been assigning people prayer partners, and they commit to calling one another. And the fun part to me is the stories of vulnerability. When people come to me and they said, "Oh, I can't believe I said that," but they were so gracious. Or I never thought that someone could think that way. I never understood this before. So our church's motto, our mission banner, is welcome, worship, and witness. So those three things are kind of tied to those, our three W's. And for me, my fourth W is writing. It's it brings me life. There's a way that creativity at any time, but including in a time of crisis, is life-giving.
Yeah, well, you have a wonderful way with words. You are a beautiful writer. I really enjoy reading and the way you put words together. Anything else that you would like to share?
Well, I did, I feel like I have permission to share this story. So just the other night, we were having one of our church's committee meetings over Zoom, of course, and we kind of zipped through our agenda decently and in good order. And we got to the end and we had a little extra time. And so we just we could have left. It was at the end of the day. But a person on that committee said, "I just want to say I really miss you all." And we just and it was as meaningful a moment on Zoom as I've had this whole pandemic, because everyone just took it and nodded. And there wasn't any kind of, "Oh, we'll see each other soon." It was just that moment and the truth of that moment.
Yeah.
And that's that kind of vulnerability.
Right.
That is just so beautifully true. And why, I think the church can be such a holy place.
That's beautiful, though, that they had the vulnerability to say that.
And people could receive it.
Yeah, they didn't have to patch over it and say it'll be okay or any of that, but just to let that pain be there. Yeah, that's beautiful. That's a great way to end. Thanks for sharing that.
Well, thank you, Ken.
I hope you've enjoyed listening to or watching this conversation. People tend to put pastors on pedestals, and often we like the view from up there, but there are dangers and disadvantages to that practice. And sometimes the people we pastor need to see that we are human, very human too. I did want to remind you that we are now in both audio and video formats. Our audio podcast continues on all major podcast providers, including the new Amazon podcast platform. And now we have added a YouTube channel with the same title, Pastors4Pastors. That's the word pastors, the number 4, and then the word pastors. I hope you'll check that channel out, subscribe, and leave some positive feedback. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time, I'm Ken Broman-Fulks, and this is Pastors for Pastors.